Elena didn't fall out of love all at once. It happened slowly. Like a candle that nobody blew out. It just ran out of wax. She remembers the exact moment she knew something was wrong. It was a Tuesday. Nothing special about that Tuesday. No fight, no argument, no slammed doors. Ethan came home, walked past her like she was furniture, opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and went straight to his office. He didn't say hello. He didn't look at her. And he didn't even know she had been standing there for 2 hours, waiting. That was the moment. Not the big explosion. Not the dramatic fight. Just a Tuesday. Just silence. Just a man who forgot his wife was alive. They met 7 years before that Tuesday. Elena was 24. Ethan was 27. He was sharp, driven, the kind of man who walked into a room and made people pay attention. She loved that about him. She loved the fire in his eyes when he talked about his dreams. He told her once, "Elena, I'm going to build something the world has never seen, and I want you right beside me when I do." She believed him. She said yes when he proposed. She cried at the altar, not from nerves but from joy, real joy, the kind that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. They were happy. For a while they were genuinely happy, but somewhere between year 2 and year 3, Ethan changed. The late nights started. First it was once a week, then 3 times, and then he just stopped coming home for dinner altogether. Elena cooked anyway, every night. She kept his plate warm. She told herself, "He's building something. He's working hard. This is temporary." She waited, and waited, and waited. By year 4, they were living like roommates, polite ones. The kind that say good morning but nothing else. She tried to reach him. She planned date nights he canceled. She bought a dress he never noticed. She once sat beside him on the couch for 3 hours hoping he would just look at her. He never looked up from his laptop. That night, Elena went to the bathroom, turned on the shower so he wouldn't hear, and cried until her knees gave out. She sat on that cold bathroom floor for a long time. And in that silence, a question crept in. A question she had been too afraid to ask herself. Does he still love me? She didn't have an answer, but deep down, deep in a place she didn't want to visit, she already knew. This is where Elena's story begins. Not with a divorce, not with a scandal, with a woman sitting on a cold bathroom floor, wondering where her husband went. And what she does next will change everything. There is a specific kind of pain that has no name. It's not heartbreak. Heartbreak is loud. It screams. It slams doors. It cries at 2 a.m. with sad music playing. This was different. This was the pain of being invisible to the one person who promised to always see you. Elena knew that pain by heart now. She started waking up at 5 a.m., not because she had somewhere to be, but because the bed felt too empty to sleep in. Ethan's side was always cold, always untouched. He had moved to the guest room sometime in year 3 and called it better for his sleep schedule. She never argued. She just folded his side of the blanket neatly every morning, like maybe today he would come back to it. He never did. So Elena built a life inside the loneliness. She threw herself into work. She was a graphic designer, talented, precise, the kind of woman whose work made clients call back. So she worked harder, took more projects, stayed late, filled every empty hour with something that needed doing. It helped. A little. Her friend Dana noticed first. "Elena, when last did you laugh? Like really laugh?" Elena smiled and said, I laugh all the time. Dana looked at her for a long moment and said nothing, because they both knew that wasn't true. The weekends were the hardest. Everyone around her seemed to exist in pairs. Couples at restaurants, husbands holding grocery bags while wives checked lists, a man in the park lifting his daughter onto his shoulders while his wife watched and laughed. Elena watched that family for longer than she should have. She went home and cleaned the entire apartment, scrubbed things that weren't dirty, rearranged shelves that didn't need rearranging. Ethan walked past her in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, and disappeared into his office without a word. She stood in that hallway holding a mop, and something inside her chest cracked, quiet and clean, like a bone breaking under pressure that has been building too long. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She took out her old journal, the one from before the marriage, before the silence, before the cold bathroom floors and the warm plates nobody ate. She opened to the last entry she ever wrote in it. It was dated 5 years ago. It said, Ethan held my hand today for no reason, just reached over and held it. I think I'm the luckiest woman alive. She read it 3 times. Then she closed the journal slowly, sat in the quiet, and for the first time, she didn't cry. She just sat there with something harder than sadness settling into her bones. It was the quiet arrival of a decision she wasn't ready to name yet. But it was coming. And nothing, not love, not history, not 7 years of waiting, was going to stop it. Elena wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't that wife, the suspicious one, the one checking phones and reading messages and timing arrivals. She trusted Ethan, even through the silence, even through the cold nights and the empty dinners in the hallways that felt like strangers passing each other. She still trusted him. That was the worst part of what happened next. It started with a perfume. A Tuesday evening. Ethan came home later than usual, which was saying something. Elena was in the kitchen when he walked past. And just for a second, just one small second, she caught it. A scent. Not his cologne. Something softer. Warmer. Something that had no business being on her husband's shirt at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. She didn't say anything. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe a colleague, maybe a crowded elevator. Maybe she was imagining things because lonely minds play tricks. She went to bed, but she didn't sleep. Then came the phone. Ethan had never been precious about his phone before. He left it on the counter, on the dining table, charging in the living room. But suddenly, it was always in his hand, always face down when he set it anywhere, always taken to the bathroom, always on silent. Elena noticed. She noticed and said nothing, because saying something meant hearing an answer, and some answers, once heard, cannot be unheard. So she stayed quiet, and she watched. 3 weeks later, she saw it. She hadn't planned to. She wasn't snooping. She was simply dropping his jacket on the chair in his office. He had left it in the living room, and his laptop was open. She wasn't going to look. She really wasn't. But a name on the screen stopped her feet. Vanessa. Just a name. But the message beside it made the room tilt. Last night was exactly what I needed. Same time Thursday? Elena stood there. 5 seconds. 10. She lost count. The jacket slipped from her fingers and dropped to the floor, and she didn't pick it up. She couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The room was completely silent except for the blood rushing in her ears like a wave about to break. And she walked out of that office. Sat down on the living room couch. stared at the wall, and something she had been carefully protecting for 7 years, that last fragile thread of hope that maybe she was wrong, maybe she was overreacting, maybe her marriage still had a heartbeat, snapped. Clean. She didn't confront him that night. She didn't cry either. She just sat there, completely still, while everything she thought she knew about her life rearranged itself into something unrecognizable. And one thought rose above all the noise. Quiet, clear, devastating. He chose someone else. There are two kinds of cruel. The first kind is loud. It shouts. It insults. It leaves marks you can point to and say, that. That is where it hurt. The second kind is quiet. It looks at you like you are nothing. It moves around you like you are air. It makes you question whether you even exist in the same space. Ethan had mastered the second kind. The morning after Elena saw that message, she woke up and made breakfast. 2 plates. Like always. Ethan came downstairs, looked at the table, picked up his keys and said, "I'll grab something at the office." And left. No good morning. No eye contact. No nothing. Elena stood in that kitchen holding a spatula, 2 plates of food going cold on the table, and she understood something with horrible clarity. He didn't just stop loving her. He stopped pretending. The days that followed were suffocating. Ethan moved through the house like she was a ghost. When she spoke, he gave one-word answers. When she asked about his day, he looked at his phone. When she touched his arm once, just a small reach for connection, he moved away so smoothly, so naturally, like he had been practicing. Like her touch was something to avoid. Elena watched herself in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman looking back. Tired eyes, tight jaw, shoulders that had been carrying something heavy for so long, they had forgotten what it felt like to drop the weight. She looked like a woman disappearing. She tried one last time, a Friday night. She cooked his favorite meal, candles on the table. She even wore the blue dress, the one he once said made her look like someone worth stopping for. Ethan came home at 10 p.m., looked at the table, looked at her, and said, "I already ate." Walked to his office, closed the door. Elena blew out the candles one by one, sat down at the table alone, and ate in silence. That night, she heard him laughing. Low and warm, coming from behind his office door. A laugh she hadn't heard in years. A laugh that used to be hers. She stood in the hallway outside that door for a long moment. Then she walked to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and made herself a promise. Not a dramatic one, not a loud one, just a quiet or unshakable promise made by a woman who has finally, hit the floor of her pain and found something solid beneath it. She was done waiting, done shrinking, done being invisible in her own home. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet promise made on the edge of that bed was the first step towards something that would one day bring Ethan Crawford to his knees. Every person has a limit. Most people never find it. They bend and bend and bend, and somehow never break. They adjust. They accommodate. They shrink themselves smaller and smaller until they fit into whatever space they are given. Elena had been bending for 5 years, but even the strongest things, bridges, bones, hearts, have a point where bending stops and breaking begins. It was a Saturday night. Ethan had actually promised with words looking at her face, that they would have dinner together. No phones, no office, just them. Elena had held on to that promise like a lifeline. She booked the restaurant they went to on their second date. The small Italian place on Fifth with the low lighting and the bread that came warm to the table. She got ready slowly, carefully, the way a woman gets ready when she still has a small, stubborn piece of hope left. She was ready by 7. By 8, she was checking her phone. By 9, she was still sitting in that restaurant alone, the bread cold, the candle burning low. The waiter coming by one too many times with that look. That gentle, pitying look that said everything without saying anything. She called Ethan 3 times. Voicemail. 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 He came home at midnight. Elna was sitting in the living room, lights on, fully dressed, still in the blue dress, still wearing the earrings she had chosen that afternoon with something that felt embarrassingly like hope. Ethan walked in, saw her, and had the absolute nerve, to look annoyed. Why are you still up? Something rose in Elena's chest, hot and fast. I waited for you, 2 hours, at the restaurant. He sighed. Actually sighed, like she was the inconvenience. Elena, I got caught up with work. It couldn't wait. It never can. Don't start. Don't start. Her voice cracked on those 2 words. Ethan, I have been waiting for 5 years. I have cooked dinners you didn't eat. I have planned evenings you canceled. I have slept on my side of a bed that felt like it was in a different country from yours and I said nothing. Nothing. And you're telling me don't start? He looked at her then. Really looked at her. And what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger. It was nothing. Complete, flat, empty nothing. Like this conversation, like she, was simply not worth the energy. He walked past her toward the hallway and said, I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow. They both knew tomorrow would never come, or Elena stood in that living room long after his bedroom door clicked shut. The house was silent. And in that silence, the last piece of something she had been protecting and nursing and refusing to let die for 7 long years, finally let go. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and thought, with a calm that surprised even herself, I am done. Not angry done, not dramatic done, just done. The kind of done that doesn't come back. There are moments in life that split everything into 2, before and after. The moment a doctor says the word nobody wants to hear. The moment a phone rings at 3 a.m. The moment you open a front door and find something that rewrites every single thing you thought you knew about your life. Elena's moment came on a Wednesday morning. Ordinary Wednesday. Gray sky outside. Coffee brewing. The small, quiet sounds of a house that had forgotten what happiness felt like. She came downstairs in her robe, my hair still messy from sleep, and walked to the kitchen. And that's when she saw it. An envelope. Sitting in the middle of the kitchen table. No note, no explanation. Just a plain white envelope with her name on it in Ethan's handwriting. She stood there for a moment. Something in her stomach already knew. The body always knows before the mind is ready to accept it. She picked it up, opened it slowly, and there they were. Divorce papers. Neat. Printed. And already signed by Ethan on every page that needed his signature. All that was missing was hers. Elena sat down. She didn't plan to. Her legs just stopped working. She sat at that kitchen table, the same table where they used to eat breakfast together in the early years, where he used to reach across and steal food from her plate and laugh when she complained. And she read every page, every cold, legal, clinical page that reduced 7 years of a marriage to checkboxes and signatures. No conversation, no warning, no last attempt, just an envelope on a table. That was what 7 years meant to Ethan Crawford, an envelope on a table. The coffee finished brewing. The machine beeped 3 times like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just folded in on itself, like a woman wasn't sitting 4 feet away holding the paperwork for the demolition of her own life. Elena looked at the coffee machine, then looked back at the papers, and she laughed. It shocked her, that laugh. It came from somewhere unexpected, short and sharp and completely hollow. Because what else do you do when the man who promised you forever serves you the end of everything on a Wednesday morning, without even the decency to look you in the eye? She sat there for a long time. The coffee went cold. The gray sky outside got grayer. And slowly, the laugh faded. And what replaced it was something quieter. Something that settled into her chest like concrete. Not sadness, not rage. Resolve. She picked up a pen. Looked at the last page where her signature was needed. And made a decision that Ethan Crawford, in all his coldness, in all his arrogance, in all his certainty that Elena would simply fall apart without him, never saw coming. Losing a marriage doesn't feel like losing a person. It feels like losing a version of yourself. The version that believed. The version that waited by the door. And the version that kept the plate warm and wore the blue dress and made reservations at Italian restaurants and held on to promises that were never meant to be kept. That version of Elena died quietly on a Wednesday morning at a kitchen table. And what was left, what stood up, washed her face, and walked back into the world, was something rawer. Something that hadn't figured out its own shape yet. The first week after signing those papers was the strangest week of Elena's life. Not the worst. Strange. Because the crying she expected never fully came. There were moments, standing in the shower, driving to work, waking at 3 a.m. to a silence so thick it had weight, where the grief would rise and crest and she would brace for it. But it never broke the way she expected. It just sat there, heavy and permanent. Like furniture she now had to live around. She told her mother first. Her mother was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, "Come home." 2 words. And somehow those 2 words did what 7 days of holding herself together couldn't. Elena pressed the phone against her chest and breathed. She didn't go home. She wasn't ready to be looked at with soft eyes and careful voices. She wasn't ready to be someone's sadness yet. She needed to be her own person first, even if she didn't know who that person was anymore. The apartment felt different without the weight of a failing marriage filling every room. Quieter, but not peaceful, yet the kind of quiet that asks too many questions. She walked through each room one evening like she was seeing it for the first time. The guest room where Ethan had slept for 2 years. The office where she had seen that name on that screen. The kitchen table where an envelope had ended everything. She rearranged the furniture in the living room at midnight. Not because it needed rearranging, because she needed to make one room, just one room in her life, look different from how Ethan had left it. She found one of his watches behind the bathroom cabinet, held it in her palm for a moment, then put it in a box, sealed it, wrote his name on it in marker, and placed it by the front door to be collected. Not with anger, with a finality that felt almost surgical. That night, Elena sat on her newly rearranged couch in her quiet apartment, in a life that no longer had the shape she had spent 7 years trying to hold together. And for the first time, she didn't try to fix it, she just sat with it. And somewhere in that stillness, beneath all the loss and the wreckage and the questions without answers, something small and stubborn flickered. Not happiness, not yet, just the very first hint of her, the real her, the one that had been waiting, even longer than she had been waiting for Ethan, to finally come home. Nobody tells you this about healing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a sunrise and soft music and a moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder and say, "You're ready now." It just shows up one random Tuesday, in a coffee shop, in the form of a stranger who asks if the seat across from you is taken. Elena had started going to a small cafe on Meridian Street 3 weeks after the divorce papers were signed. Not for any deep reason. And the coffee was good, and the corner table by the window had just enough noise to make the silence inside her head bearable. She would bring her laptop, work on client projects, drink 1 cup too many, and go home. It was routine, safe, small, exactly what she needed. He walked in on a Thursday, tall, calm, the kind of man who moved through a crowded room without bumping into anything, not because he was careful, but because he was aware, present in a way that was almost unusual. And the cafe was full, every table taken except the empty chair across from Elena. He approached, smiled once, not the performing kind of smile, just a natural, unthinking one. "Is anyone sitting here?" Elena looked up from her laptop. No. That was it. That was the whole introduction. He sat down, opened a book, ordered black coffee, and read. He didn't try to talk to her. And somehow, that was the most interesting thing about him. 20 minutes passed. Then he laughed quietly at something in his book. Just a small exhale of a laugh. Private. Unperformed. Elena glanced up. He caught her looking and held up the book. "Sorry, this character just made the worst decision I've ever read." Elena looked at the cover. "I read that book," she said. "He gets worse." The man looked at her, then at the book, then back at her. "You're serious?" Unfortunately. He laughed again, a real one this time, and Elena, without planning it, without expecting it, and without even fully realizing it was happening, smiled. Not a polite smile. Not the tight, performative smile she had been wearing like armor for the past 3 weeks. A real one. Small, quiet, but real. And it felt so unfamiliar on her face that it almost startled her. They talked for 40 minutes. About the book. About bad decisions fictional characters make. About coffee. About nothing important. He told her his name was Marcus. She told him hers. He didn't ask if she was married. I didn't scan for a ring. Didn't perform interest or lean in too eagerly. He just talked to her. Like she was a person, like she was interesting, like she was visible. Elena walked home that evening in the gray afternoon air and noticed something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. She felt light, not fixed, not healed, not whole, just light, like something that had been pressing down on her chest for years had shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. And Elena told herself it wasn't anything. Just a man in a cafe. Just a conversation about a book. Just 40 minutes of accidental company on a Thursday afternoon. She told herself that on Friday. And Saturday. And Sunday, when she found herself wondering if he would be there on Monday. She went on Monday. He was there. Same corner, same black coffee, different book. He looked up when she walked in, nodded once, the easy nod of someone who is genuinely glad to see a person but has no agenda about it. Elena sat at her usual table. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. 2 people, 2 laptops, 2 coffees. Then he slid a folded napkin across the table without looking up from his screen. She opened it. It said, "The character got worse, didn't he?" Not a question, a statement. Yelena pressed her lips together to keep from smiling and wrote back, "Chapter 14 will destroy you." He read it, nodded gravely, like she had delivered genuinely tragic news, and something in Elena's chest did a thing she wasn't prepared for. It lifted. By the third week they were meeting there intentionally. No grand conversation about it, no formal arrangement, are just 2 people who started showing up at the same time because somewhere quietly between Tuesday and Thursday, it had become something they looked forward to. Marcus was unlike anyone Elena had been close to. He didn't fill silence with noise. He didn't perform. He didn't talk about himself in the exhausting way that some men do, stacking accomplishments like evidence of worth. He asked questions, real ones. And then he actually listened to the answers. "Mosh, what do you love about design?" he asked one afternoon. Elena paused. Nobody had asked her that in years, not even her. "I love that you can take something broken or confusing and make it clear," she said slowly. "Like, you can take a mess and give it structure. Give it beauty, make it make sense." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "That's not just design," he said quietly. "That's how you see the world." Elena looked down at her coffee cup. Because he was right, and because nobody had ever seen that about her before. Not even Ethan. Especially not Ethan. One evening it rained hard and suddenly, and they were both stuck under the cafe awning waiting for it to slow down. They stood close, not romantically, just practically, watching the street flood in real time. Marcus said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Elena tensed slightly. "Depends. Are you okay? Like, actually okay? You're not the version people say to stop others from worrying." The rain hammered the awning above them. Elena watched a river form along the curb. And for the first time since the envelope on the kitchen table, since the cold bathroom floor, since the Tuesday that started everything, she told the truth. "No," she said, "but I think I'm getting there." Marcus nodded. Didn't try to fix it. Didn't offer solutions. Didn't make it about himself. Just nodded. Like that answer was enough. Like she was enough. Elena drove home in the rain that night, gripping the steering wheel. Not from fear. From the overwhelming, terrifying, wonderful realization that she had just let someone in. Just slightly. Just enough to feel the difference. And the difference felt like breathing for the first time in 7 years. There are people who leave your life and take the door with them. You patch the wall, you repaint, or you rearrange the furniture so the gap isn't the first thing you see every morning. You build a new normal, brick by careful brick, until one day you wake up and realize you're okay, not perfect, not healed all the way, but okay. And then they knock. It was a Sunday evening. Elena was on her couch with tea, a design project open on her laptop, soft music playing low. The apartment felt like hers now, fully hers. She had plants on the windowsill that were somehow still alive. A new rug. Candles that she lit for herself and nobody else. She was okay. Then the knock came. 3 times. Measured. Familiar. She knew that knock before she reached the door. Her hand hesitated on the handle for just a moment. Then she opened it. Ethan. He looked different. Smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way a person looks when they've lost the certainty that once made them take up space. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved over her face quickly, searching for something. Elena. Just her name, like he had been practicing it. Ethan. Her voice was steady. That surprised her. What are you doing here? He shifted his weight, looked past her into the apartment briefly, then back at her. Can I come in? A pause. No, she said. You can talk from there. Something moved across his face. Not anger, something closer to shame. Good. I made a mistake, he said. Elena said nothing. She had learned the power of silence from 7 years of receiving it. Yom, I handled everything wrong. The marriage, the end of it, everything. He exhaled slowly. I think about it. More than you'd expect. What do you want, Ethan? I want... He stopped, recalibrated. I want to know if there's any chance, any at all, that we could talk, start somewhere. Elena looked at him. This man who had walked past her like furniture, who had sighed at her tears like they were inconvenient, who had put a future's end in an envelope and left it on a kitchen table without the courage to hand it to her himself. She looked at him for a long time, and she felt nothing. Not anger, not longing, not the devastating pull she had feared this moment would bring. Just clarity, clean and complete. I don't think that's a good idea, she said quietly. Elena. Good night, Ethan. She closed the door, gently. No slam, no drama, just a soft final click. She stood on her side of that door, and her tea was still warm on the coffee table. Her music still played, her plants still sat on the windowsill. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had just been confirmed. She pressed her back against the door, closed her eyes, and smiled. Not because Ethan had come back, but because she had just discovered something extraordinary. He had no power anymore. Not even a little. But somewhere across the city, Ethan Crawford wasn't giving up. And a man who is used to getting what he wants is most dangerous when he's just been told no. Closing that door felt like victory. And it was. But victory has a strange aftertaste. Especially at 2 a.m. when the apartment is dark and quiet and the mind starts asking questions that the heart isn't ready to answer. Elena lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling. Not crying, not broken, just thinking. The thing about 7 years is this. You can't just delete it. Nah, you can close doors and rearrange furniture and buy new rugs and grow plants on windowsills. You can smile at men in cafes and feel light walking home in the gray afternoon air. But 7 years lives in the body. It lives in the muscle memory of reaching for someone in the dark. In the reflex of cooking for two. In the way a familiar voice outside your door can make your hand hesitate on the handle even when your mind already knows the answer. Elena knew her answer. She just hadn't expected the question to still have weight. She saw Marcus the next afternoon. He was already at their table when she arrived. Coffee waiting. A second cup beside it. Hers, exactly how she took it, without her asking. She sat down, looked at the cup. You remembered. It's not complicated, he said. You're a person who knows what she likes. I just paid attention. Such a small thing. Such a devastatingly small thing. And yet Elena had to look away because her eyes were suddenly doing something embarrassing. She told him about Ethan. Not everything. Not the perfume or the name on the laptop screen or the envelope on the table. Just the shape of it. My ex came by last night, she said. Wanted another chance. Marcus wrapped both hands around his cup. Said nothing. Waited. I said no, Elena continued. I meant it. She paused. I didn't expect it to still feel like something, even when the answer is clear. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, feeling something doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It just means it was real. You can't spend 7 years with someone and feel nothing when they reappear. That's not weakness. That's just being human. Elena looked at him. When did you get this wise? Chapter 14, he said. She laughed. Real, sudden, unguarded. But walking home that evening, the doubt crept in. Not about Ethan. That door was closed. About Marcus. Because here was the thing Elena hadn't let herself examine too closely until now. Marcus was kind, attentive, steady. Everything Ethan wasn't. And that perfection, was beginning to feel almost too neat. Nobody arrives without luggage. Nobody is that present, that patient, that perfectly calibrated to every single thing a wounded woman needs, without a reason. She stopped on the corner of Meridian Street, stood in the evening air, and for the first time since that Thursday in the cafe, she wondered. Who exactly was Marcus? Not with fear. Not yet. Just a small, quiet question. The kind that starts as a whisper and has a habit of getting louder. The truth never announces itself. It doesn't send a warning. It doesn't give you time to brace. It doesn't wait until you're ready or strong enough or standing somewhere comfortable. It just arrives. Usually at the worst possible moment. Usually when you were just beginning to believe, really believe, that maybe finally things were going to be okay. It was a Friday evening. Elena and Marcus had spent the afternoon at a small art exhibition downtown. Easy and warm. The kind of afternoon that feels like something you want to photograph, not because it's dramatic, but because it's quietly perfect. Afterward, they stopped at a restaurant for dinner. Marcus excused himself to take a call. 2 minutes, he said. Sorry, work. Elena smiled. Go. She sat at the table, poured water, looked around at the other diners living their ordinary Friday evenings. She felt good. She felt hopeful. That was the cruelest part. She didn't mean to hear it. Marcus was standing just outside the restaurant's glass door, back turned, phone pressed to his ear. The door was slightly ajar. A waiter had just walked through and let it drift open. Elena wasn't listening. And then a single sentence floated through that open door and landed on her table like a grenade. Ethan, I'm handling it. She doesn't know anything. The room didn't spin. That's what people say. The room spun. It didn't. Everything just went very still, very sharp. The way the world looks in the seconds after a car accident when your brain hasn't caught up to your body yet. Elena sat completely still, her water glass in her hand. Ice cold. Ethan. Marcus had just said Ethan's name. She doesn't know anything. She set the glass down carefully, precisely. Like if she moved too suddenly, something would shatter that couldn't be put back together. She watched Marcus through the glass door. His posture, his body language, the ease of a man having a conversation he had clearly had before. She thought about the cafe, the napkin with the joke about the book, the coffee waiting exactly how she took it, the rain under the awning. Are you okay? Like actually okay. On every perfectly calibrated moment. Every question that hit exactly the right nerve. Every response that landed exactly where a wounded woman needed it to land. Marcus came back to the table, sat down, smiled. Sorry about that. Where were we? Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and she smiled back. Steady, warm, giving absolutely nothing away. You were about to tell me about your work, she said. Right. What is it that you do exactly, Marcus? a beat. Almost invisible. Almost. Consulting, he said smoothly. Corporate strategy mostly. Interesting, Elena said, and lifted her water glass, and smiled again. But behind that smile, behind those steady, giving nothing away eyes, a woman who had already survived one betrayal was doing the only thing that made sense. She was paying attention. Every word, every pause, every almost invisible beat. Because this time, she wasn't going to be caught off guard. In this time, Elena was going to be the one who knew everything first. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was falling apart. Because she was thinking. There is a difference. And Elena knew it well by now. Falling apart is loud even when it's silent. It paces. It spirals. It asks the same question 100 times without wanting an answer. Thinking is different. Thinking is still. Focused. A mind that has been through enough to know that panic is a luxury it can no longer afford. Mini Elena sat at her kitchen table until 3 a.m. And she thought. She laid it all out in her head like a case file. Marcus appeared weeks after the divorce, always in the right place, always saying the right thing. Never too much, never too little. Perfectly calibrated to a woman who was wounded and lonely and desperate to feel seen. And now, Ethan, I'm handling it. She doesn't know anything. Handling what exactly? She doesn't know what exactly? The obvious conclusion was devastating. A Marcus was sent by Ethan. To do what? She wasn't entirely sure yet. To spy? To gather information for the divorce settlement? To manipulate her emotionally? To make her look unstable? To give Ethan leverage? She didn't know the full shape of it yet, but she knew enough. Here was what she also knew. Marcus, whatever his original purpose, had given her something real. Not the relationship, not the warmth he had performed so convincingly. Information. Because a man working for Ethan Crawford, on sitting across from her every week, thinking she was oblivious, was the most valuable thing Elena had stumbled into since this whole nightmare began. She made her decision at 3:47 a.m., not emotionally, not reactively, strategically. She was not going to confront Marcus. She was not going to disappear. She was not going to let either of them know that she knew a single thing. She was going to keep showing up to that cafe. Keep smiling. Keep having easy conversations about books and coffee and nothing important. And while Marcus reported back to Ethan that everything was fine, Elena was going to build something. Quietly. Carefully. Brick by brick. She thought about the last 7 years. The waiting. The shrinking. The cold bathroom floors. The warm plates nobody ate. The blue dress. The restaurant. The envelope on the table. She had spent 7 years being something that happened to. Not anymore. She opened her laptop. He started with her finances. What she had. What she was owed from the marriage settlement. What Ethan's lawyers had been quietly trying to minimize. Then her work. Her client list. Her skills. The design business she had been running at half capacity because grief had been sitting in the driver's seat. She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she started making calls. Not that night, but planning them. Writing names, mapping a direction. By the time the sun came up, Elena had not chosen Marcus. She had not chosen Ethan. She had chosen something neither of them had ever considered. Herself. Fully. Finally. Completely. And a woman who chooses herself, after everything that has been done to her, is not a woman to underestimate. Ethan Crawford had never lost anything in his life. Not a deal, not a negotiation, not a single thing he decided he wanted. He was the kind of man who didn't accept outcomes. He engineered them. Who didn't wait for doors to open. He found the hinges and removed them. Who looked at every situation, every person, every relationship as a variable to be managed. Elena had been a variable once, a comfortable one, a useful one. And now, she was becoming something he couldn't control. That was unacceptable. He called her on a Wednesday afternoon. Elena was at her desk, working. She saw his name on the screen and let it ring twice. Not from hesitation, but from the deliberate calm of a woman who was done being reactive. Then she answered. Ethan. Elena. His voice was different from the doorstep. Warmer. Carefully warm. The way a fire is carefully warm when someone has arranged it to look accidental. I've been thinking about what I said. I don't think I expressed myself properly. You were clear enough. I wasn't. A pause. Measured. I've been talking to someone, a therapist. I'm working through some things I should have worked through years ago. Elena said nothing. I know I hurt you. I know sorry doesn't cover 7 years, but Elena, what we had was real. You know it was real. And here was the terrible, complicated truth. Parts of it had been real. The early years. The man who held her hand for no reason. Who said she was worth stopping for. Who cried at their wedding. Actually cried, 2 tears, quickly wiped away, hoping she hadn't noticed. She had noticed. She had kept that memory like a pressed flower between the pages of something she was no longer sure had ever existed. I'm not the man I was during those last years, Ethan continued. I was consumed, selfish. I chose everything over you, and I have to live with that. Elena closed her eyes briefly. What do you want, Ethan? Dinner, he said. One dinner, that's all I'm asking. If you sit across from me and feel nothing, I'll never call again. She almost said no. The word was right there. But then she thought about Marcus at the restaurant. Ethan, I'm handling it. She thought about the case file in her head. The settlement Ethan's lawyers were quietly undermining. The things she still didn't know the full shape of. And she thought, a dinner with Ethan, while Ethan thinks Marcus has her distracted and off balance, might be exactly the kind of information gathering she needed. Fine, she said. Dinner. Ethan's relief was audible. Immediate. Yet the sound of a man who had been holding his breath. Saturday. I'll book somewhere. Somewhere public, Elena said. Of course. She hung up, sat back in her chair, looked at the ceiling. Because here was the thing about men who spend their lives engineering outcomes. They never consider the possibility that someone else is engineering one too. Ethan thought he was pulling Elena back in. He thought Marcus had softened her, confused her, left her vulnerable enough to manipulate. He thought he was winning. He had never been more wrong in his life. There is a moment in every deception where the deceiver forgets they are deceiving, where the performance becomes something uncomfortably close to real, where the lines that were supposed to be clear start bleeding at the edges, where a man who came into someone's life with an agenda finds himself sitting across from her, wondering when exactly the agenda stopped being the most important thing in the room. Marcus was reaching that moment, and it was destroying him quietly. Elena noticed the change before he did. The Marcus of the first weeks had been smooth, effortless, every word landing perfectly, every gesture calibrated. every moment of connection arriving exactly on cue like a man following a very well-rehearsed script. But lately, he hesitated. Small hesitations. The kind most people would miss. A half second before answering a simple question. A moment where he looked at her, and something moved behind his eyes that didn't match the easy smile he put on top of it. Elena noticed everything. She said nothing. It was a Tuesday at the cafe. They had been talking about her design work, a new project she was genuinely excited about, a rebrand for a small company that had been invisible for years and was ready to be seen. "You light up when you talk about this," Marcus said. "I love this part," Elena said. "More taking something that's been overlooked and making it impossible to ignore." Marcus looked at her for a moment too long, then looked down at his coffee. Elena watched the side of his face. Something was working behind it. Something uncomfortable. The expression of a man sitting inside a version of himself he no longer felt entirely at home in. His phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. His jaw tightened, barely, almost invisibly. And he flipped it face down. "See everything okay?" Elena asked. "Fine," he said. "Too quickly," she smiled. "You sure?" "Just work. Just work." The same two words Ethan had used for 3 years while their marriage dissolved. He excused himself 10 minutes later. "I have to make a call." 2 minutes. He went outside. This time Elena didn't overhear anything. This time she watched through the glass. His posture was different from the last time. Tighter. His free hand pressed flat against the outside wall like he needed something to push against. His head dropped once. The gesture of a man receiving news he didn't want or instructions he didn't like. He came back to the table. Sat down. Picked up his coffee like nothing had happened. "Marcus," Elena said quietly. "Yeah? Is there something you want to tell me?" He looked at her. And for one fraction of a second, one small, unguarded, devastating fraction, the mask slipped. She saw it. Oh, the guilt. Real and raw and completely unperformed. The face of a man who had walked into something thinking it was simple and found out too late that it wasn't. Then the mask came back. "No," he said. "Everything's fine." Elena nodded slowly, looked down at her cup. But she had seen it. That one unguarded fraction of a second. And it told her everything she needed to know. Marcus wasn't just Ethan's instrument anymore. He was a man caught between the thing he had been paid to do and the thing he was no longer sure he could live with doing. That fracture, that small human fracture, was exactly what Elena had been waiting for. Some truths are so large they don't fit inside a single moment. They have to be assembled, piece by piece. Like a photograph developing slowly in a darkroom, shapes emerging from nothing, details sharpening, all until finally the full image appears and you understand that what you're looking at was always there. You just couldn't see it yet. Elena was about to see it. It started with a name. She had been quietly doing what careful, methodical people do when they suspect something. Not panicking, not confronting, just researching. She had typed Marcus's full name, Marcus Hale, into a search engine 3 days after the restaurant. Not expecting much, just looking. What came back stopped her cold. Marcus Hale, former financial strategist. Left his firm 4 years ago under circumstances that weren't fully public. One mention in a business journal, brief, almost buried, about a corporate dispute involving a company called Crawford Consolidated. Ethan's company. Elena leaned closer to her screen. She dug further. And the picture that developed over the next 2 hours was not the one she had expected. Marcus hadn't been sent by Ethan to help him. He had been sent by Ethan to protect him. 4 years ago, Marcus had been Ethan's financial strategist, his most trusted one. He had helped Ethan structure deals, move assets, build the empire that made Ethan Crawford look untouchable. But somewhere in those dealings, Elena found the shape of it in fragments across 3 different sources. There were transactions that weren't clean. Money moved in ways that only made sense if you were hiding something. Accounts that existed in names that weren't Ethan's. Marcus knew about all of it. He had been part of it. And the divorce settlement, Elena's divorce settlement, the one Ethan's lawyers had been quietly minimizing for months, was connected to those accounts. Because buried inside the assets that were being hidden from the settlement were funds that legally, undeniably, belonged to Elena. Ethan wasn't just trying to win her back. He was trying to keep her close enough to control, confused enough to miss what was being taken from her. Distracted enough by Marcus, by warmth and coffee and conversations about books, to not look at the numbers closely. Elena sat back from her laptop. The apartment was completely silent. She looked at the screen for a long time. Then she looked at the ceiling. Then she laughed. Not the hollow laugh from the kitchen table the morning of the envelope. Not the brittle sound of a woman breaking. This was different. And this was the laugh of a woman who had just realized that the men who underestimated her had handed her everything she needed. Marcus knew where the bodies were buried, financially speaking. And Marcus, cracking, guilty, mask-slipping Marcus, was sitting in a cafe on Meridian Street thinking he was managing her, while she had just become the most dangerous person in his world. She picked up her phone, not to call Ethan, not to confront Marcus. She called a lawyer. He's not the one handling her divorce. A different one. A name her friend Dana had mentioned once. A woman known for taking cases that looked unwinnable and winning them spectacularly. "I need to meet with you," Elena said. "I have documentation of financial misconduct tied to my divorce settlement, and I have a witness who doesn't know he's about to become one." The lawyer said. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" Elena said. "I'll be there at 8. She hung up, sat in her quiet apartment, in her plants on the windowsill, new rug, candles for her self-life, and felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Not happiness, not relief, power, real, quiet, unshakable power, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that simply acts. The lawyer's name was Sandra Cole. She was 51, small, the kind of woman who wore no jewelry except one watch, plain, precise, and looked at you like she was already 3 moves ahead of whatever you were about to say. Elena liked her immediately. They met at 8 a.m. sharp. Elena brought everything: printed documents, screenshots organized by date, a timeline she had built herself between midnight and 4 a.m. Clean, clear, devastating in its precision. Sandra looked through it without speaking for 11 minutes. Elena counted. Then Sandra looked up. "How did you find all of this?" "I paid attention," Elena said. "I've had a lot of practice." Sandra held her gaze for a moment, and then she nodded once, the nod of a woman who recognized another woman who'd been underestimated and was done with it. "Okay," Sandra said. "Let's talk about what we can do." Walking out of that office 2 hours later, Elena stopped on the pavement outside, stood in the morning air, breathed, because something had just happened in that room that had nothing to do with lawyers or settlements or documentation. She had walked in alone, with nothing but what she had found and what she knew and what she had quietly, carefully, methodically built while two men thought she was falling apart. And Sandra Cole, who did not give compliments, Elena could tell, had looked at her across that desk and said, "You did the hard part already. I just need to finish it." Elena had done the hard part. She let that sit for a moment. She had. On the way home, she stopped at the cafe on Meridian Street. Not to see Marcus. Too early for that. Just to sit at the corner table by the window, order one coffee, watch the street. She thought about the woman who had first walked into this cafe, raw from a divorce, hollowed out from 7 years of slow disappearance, looking for just enough noise to make the silence in her head bearable. That woman had sat here hoping to feel less invisible, and then a man had sat across from her and said all the right things, and she had felt light walking home. She had confused being seen with being known, being heard with being understood, being chosen with being valued. She understood the difference now. Being seen means nothing if the person looking at you is looking for something else. Being heard means nothing if the listener is reporting back. Being chosen means nothing if you were chosen as a strategy. The real work, the work Elena had been doing since 3:47 a.m. in her kitchen, had nothing to do with Ethan, nothing to do with Marcus. It was this: sitting alone at a corner table, trusting her own eyes, trusting her own mind, trusting the woman who had survived cold bathroom floors and warm plates nobody ate and envelopes on kitchen tables and perfectly calibrated deceptions, and come out the other side not broken, sharpened. She finished her coffee, left a tip, walked out into the morning. She had a settlement to rebuild, a business to grow, a life to construct entirely on her own terms. She had Marcus to handle, carefully, strategically, with the precision of someone who understood exactly what he knew and exactly what it was worth. She had Ethan to face, not with anger, not with pain, but with documentation and a lawyer named Sandra Cole who didn't lose. But first, just for this one morning, she walked slowly, felt the air, looked at the city around her like it was somewhere she had chosen to be, because it was. Elena wasn't waiting anymore for attention, for love, for someone to come back, for someone to see her. She was the someone now, and that, after everything, was the most important thing she had ever become. Elena chose a Sunday, not randomly. Sunday because Ethan was always most comfortable on Sundays, most relaxed, most certain that the week ahead was his to control. She had lived with him long enough to know his rhythms, the particular ease of a man who believed everything was going according to plan. Let him be comfortable. Uncomfortable men make mistakes. She called them both. Marcus first. "Can you meet me at the cafe this afternoon, 3 o'clock? A pause. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she said. "I just want to talk." Then Ethan. "I need to see you. Today, 4 o'clock. That restaurant you booked. Change it to somewhere private. Your office." Ethan agreed immediately, eagerly. The sound of a man who thought the door was opening. She arrived at the cafe at 3, exactly. Marcus was already there, and their table, his black coffee. That familiar posture, present, attentive, performing warmth so well he had almost convinced himself it wasn't a performance anymore. Elena sat down, looked at him, and said, quietly, without drama, without anger, "I know, Marcus." The cafe noise continued around them. Cups, conversation, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Sunday. Marcus went very still. "Elena, I know about Crawford Consolidated. I know about the accounts. I know about the settlement. She paused. I know Ethan sent you. The mask didn't slip this time. It fell, completely. What was underneath it was exactly what she had seen in that one unguarded fraction of a second 3 weeks ago. Guilt. Raw and real and heavy. How long? He asked quietly. Long enough. He looked down at the table. A long silence. Elena, I'm not here for an apology, she said. I'm here because you have a choice. She slid a document across the table. My lawyer prepared this. It's a witness statement. Everything you know about those accounts, the transactions, the timeline, all of it. You sign this and cooperate fully, and your name stays out of the settlement proceedings. Marcus looked at the document, then at her. And if I don't? Then Sandra Cole includes you in everything. And what you know about those accounts becomes what everyone knows about you. He picked up the document, read it slowly. Elena watched him without flinching, when this was the man who had sat across from her and asked, Are you okay? Like actually okay? Who had made her feel seen for the first time in years? Who had been sent to distract her and somewhere along the way had the audacity to genuinely care? She had no interest in destroying him, but she had even less interest in protecting him at her own expense. Marcus picked up a pen. Signed. She was at Ethan's office by 4. He had arranged the room carefully. Soft lighting. 2 glasses of wine already poured. The performance of a man engineering a romantic reconciliation. Elena sat down. Didn't touch the wine. Placed Sandra's full case file on his desk. Watched his face. The confidence left him slowly, page by page, like air leaving something that had been inflated for a very long time. By the last page, Ethan Crawford looked small. Actually small. The fire that had made people pay attention when he walked into rooms. Gone. Where did you... He started. It doesn't matter, Elena said. Elena, we can talk about this. We're done talking, she said. Sandra will be in contact with your lawyers tomorrow morning. I suggest you cooperate. She stood up, straightened her jacket. Ethan looked up at her from behind his carefully arranged desk in his carefully arranged office. And for the first time in their entire history together, he had nothing, no move, no leverage, no version of events he could engineer his way out of. Just a woman standing across from him who had survived everything he put her through and come out knowing more than he ever imagined she could. Elena. Goodbye, Ethan. She walked out, through the lobby, through the glass doors, into the Sunday evening air. Didn't look back. Not once. The settlement took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of documents and phone calls and Sandra Cole doing what Sandra Cole did, walking into rooms and leaving with more than anyone expected to give. Ethan's lawyers pushed back twice. Sandra pushed harder both times. On the 41st day, Ethan Crawford signed. Elena was in her apartment when Sandra called. She was working. A new client. A women's foundation that was expanding nationally and needed a brand identity that felt like strength without arrogance. Elena had been absorbed in it for days. Colors, typography, the precise visual language of a thing that knew exactly what it was. Her phone rang. Sandra. It's done, Sandra said. Full settlement. Everything we asked for. Elena set her pencil down, looked at the wall. Everything. Everything. She didn't scream, didn't jump, didn't call 10 people. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, Thank you, Sandra. Don't thank me, Sandra said. You built the case. I just carried it across the finish line. Elena smiled, hung up, sat in her quiet apartment surrounded by design sketches and coffee cups and plants on the windowsill that were somehow still thriving. RN cried, not from sadness, from release. The specific, overwhelming release of a weight that has been on your body so long you stopped feeling it as weight and started feeling it as just the way things are. And then one day it lifts, and you feel your own shoulders for the first time in years. She called her mother. It's over, Elena said. It's really over. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, come home this weekend. This time Elena said yes. She went home on a Friday evening. Now her mother had cooked everything Elena loved. The apartment smelled like childhood and safety, and the specific warmth of being known by someone who has known you longest. They sat at the kitchen table, not so different from the kitchen table that had held an envelope that ended a marriage, and ate and talked and laughed until the food was gone and the night was late. Her mother looked at her at one point across the table, really looked at her. You look different, her mother said. Different how? Her mother thought for a moment. Like yourself, she said simply. You look like yourself again. Elena drove home on Sunday evening, windows down, music up, the city moving past her in the particular gold of a late afternoon that has no agenda. She thought about the last year, the cold bathroom floors, the warm plates, the blue dress, the envelope, the cafe, the napkin note, the rain under the awning, and the restaurant and the open door and a sentence that had changed everything. She thought about all of it, not with bitterness, not with grief, with something quieter and more permanent, gratitude, not for what happened to her, for what it made her. Because here was the truth Elena understood now. Sitting in her car with the windows down and the music up and the whole city golden around her. Pain is not the enemy. Staying small to avoid it is. She had spent 7 years making herself smaller, quieter, more accommodating, more invisible. Hoping that if she took up less space, the distance between her and Ethan would somehow close. It never closed. Because the problem was never her size. The problem was that she was in the wrong room. She was in the right room now. Her room. Her life. Her terms. The design business was growing faster than she had projected. 3 new clients in 6 weeks. A 4th inquiry that morning from a company whose name she recognized. Respected, established, the kind of work that builds reputations. She had money now, real money. Hers. Earned and settled and signed for in a room where Ethan Crawford had looked small. She had Sandra Cole's number saved under. Woman who doesn't lose. She had Dana, who had asked when Elena last really laughed and was now getting a very satisfying answer every time they spoke. She had her mother's kitchen on weekends. She had plants that were still alive. It wasn't a perfect life. It was better than that. It was a real one. Built from nothing. By a woman who'd been handed nothing but pain and time. And the quiet, unshakable decision made at 3:47 a.m. at a kitchen table. To choose herself. 6 months after the settlement, Elena's design firm was featured in a national business magazine. Half a page, clean layout, a photograph of her at her desk, not posed, just working, caught in the particular focus of a woman who loves what she does. The headline read, "The designer who builds brands that cannot be ignored." She read it once, smiled once, put it face down on her desk, and went back to work. She was at a client dinner that November when she met Daniel. No cafe this time, no orchestrated meeting, no perfectly calibrated entrance. He was seated 2 tables away arguing quietly but passionately with someone about architecture. Not performing the argument, actually in it. The kind of conversation where both people are so absorbed in the idea that they forget there's a room around them. Elena noticed him the way you notice something genuine in a world that has shown you a lot of performance. She looked away, went back to her dinner. An hour later, he was at the bar when she stopped to settle her bill. He glanced over. "You were watching me argue about buildings," he said. Not accusatory, amused. "You were loud," Elena said. "I was right," he said. That's different." She looked at him. He looked back. No agenda in it. No calibration. Just a man who had said something honest and was waiting to see what she did with it. She laughed. "Were you, though?" "Completely," he said. "I'll prove it if you have 20 minutes." She had 20 minutes. They stood at that bar for 2 hours, talking about buildings and design and the specific satisfaction of making something that lasts, about cities and what they say about the people who build them, about nothing important and everything that matters. He didn't ask if she was seeing someone. He didn't perform interest. He was just present, real. The uncalibrated, unpolished, genuine presence of a person who had nothing to prove. When they finally said goodnight outside the restaurant, he said, "I'd like to do this again, without the argument about architecture, or maybe with it." Elena smiled. "Maybe with it," she said. She drove home that night in the November cold, and she noticed something. She wasn't analyzing it, wasn't building a case file, wasn't watching for the mask or listening for the hesitation or waiting for the moment the performance slipped to reveal something darker underneath. She was just smiling. Not because Daniel was perfect. She had no idea who Daniel was yet. But because she had walked into a room as herself, fully, completely, without apology. And someone had looked across and been interested in exactly that. Not a wounded woman to be managed. Not a settlement to be minimized. Not a variable to be controlled. Just Elena. She thought about the woman on the cold bathroom floor. The woman folding his side of the blanket every morning. The woman in the blue dress blowing out candles alone. The woman who signed those papers and sat in the silence afterward and felt something she couldn't name yet gathering in her bones. She wanted to tell that woman something. Not that it gets easy. Not that the pain disappears or the years stop mattering or the people who hurt you stop existing. Just this. Hold on. Not for them, not for love, not even for hope. Hold on for the version of you that's waiting on the other side of all of this. She is worth it. She is so worth it. Elena pulled into her building, turned off the engine, sat for a moment in the dark and the quiet. Plants on the windowsill upstairs. A business growing. A mother's kitchen on weekends. A life that was real and earned and entirely, unapologetically hers. And somewhere in a city that was about to become more interesting. A man who argued about architecture and didn't know yet that he had just met the most remarkable woman he would ever encounter. She got out of the car, walked to her building, looked up once at the November sky, dark and wide and full of everything that hadn't happened yet, and smiled. Not the polite smile, not the armor smile, or not the smile of a woman performing okay for a world that kept asking. The real one. The one that had been waiting. Through 7 years of silence and cold floors and warm plates and envelopes and cafes and deceptions and confrontations and settlements and mornings that felt like starting from nothing. Waiting for a life that finally felt like coming home. This is Elena's story. A woman who was ignored. A woman who was betrayed. just a woman who was underestimated by every single person who should have known better, and a woman who, quietly, methodically, on her own terms. 1. The end. If this story moved you, you already know someone who needed to hear it. Share it. Because somewhere out there is a woman still sitting on a cold bathroom floor. And she needs to know it doesn't end there.